Okay, so this is a PreCalculus course. Today is lesson 7.1, day 2. So if you're keeping along with the guided notes, this is the lesson we're going to be going over. It's also parabolas. So yesterday we kind of determining characteristics and the graph of a parabola when the equation is written in the explicit form or the standard form. And so today what we want to examine is what do we do in this case where it's not written in standard form, where it's kind of written in this more familiar form, but it's not exactly conducive to figuring out all this information like the vertex, the focus, the axis of symmetry, and directrix. So what we end up having to do is we have to end up kind of manipulating this equation in order to figure out what it is. Okay, so let's go ahead and look at this. So the problem reads, write this in standard form, and then we want to identify the vertex, focus, axis of symmetry, directrix, and we also want to graph this out. Alright, so the first thing I always like to do whenever I'm doing a problem is kind of just write it down so that I kind of know that I fully have internalized it. So let's do that. So we say y is equal to negative 1/4 x squared. Okay, so I've written this out. So the first thing I'm going to want to do in this problem is, and really in a lot of problems in pre-calculus, this is a common first step, is I'm going to want to factor. And I want to factor from the x terms. Right, so I want to factor from the x terms. So right here. So here I have an x squared and an x. So what I want to do is I want to factor this number in front of the x squared out of the way. So let's go ahead and factor that out. So y is equal to negative 1/4. So this just is x squared. Now, the way we figure out what number goes in front of here is we have to think, okay, if I pull out a 1/4 out of this whole equation, what multiplied by negative 1/4 would give me 3, right? So maybe if you want to be really algebraic about it, you could say 1/4 a is equal to 3, and then we can multiply both sides by negative 1/4, and of course that saves us that a is. So we know that that has to be a negative 12x. And of course you have the, so we close that off, and we have the 6 still hanging around. Okay, so my next step, the next thing I want to do is what is called complete the square, right? So I want to complete the square. Well, I want to complete the square, but first I have to know how to do that. And in case you forgot, what completing the square basically means is you're going to take the b part of the quadratic equation. So as you can see, that's here. This is our quadratic equation, right? You're going to take the b part, which is this 12, chop it in half, and then square that result. So as a formula, if you'd like one, it's going to be b over 2, and then you have to square. So when we do that for this problem, negative 12 cut in half is going to be negative 6. But then when we square it, that becomes 36. So what we do is we add that to this equation. So we say y is equal to negative 1/4 x squared minus 12x. So then we add that 36. Now this part's very important, so be very careful about this. And what ends up happening here is you actually have to subtract out the 36, right? Because you can't just add a 36 to an equation. That wouldn't make any sense because that would completely change the equation. So we'd have to actually subtract out a 36, right? Subtract out. And of course you still got the little bitty 6 still hanging around there. You still got the little bitty 6 hanging around at the end. Okay. So now what our next step is we're going to take this extra number and we're actually going to get rid of it, and how we're going to do that is we're going to multiply it by this negative 1/4 in front so we can pull it out of the parentheses, right? So our third step is pull last number out. Right? And the way we do that is we say, okay, so y is equal to, so all of this stuff will stay inside the parentheses. So the negative 1/4 will stay in front still. X squared minus 12 plus x plus 36 is going to stay there. What is going to be missing, though, is this 36, because what we're going to do is we're going to multiply this negative 36 by negative 1/4, and that's going to be like pulling it out of the equation, like we've kind of extracted it. So if we look at that, let's see, negative 36 times negative 1/4, that's basically a fourth of 36. That's going to give you 9. So you could either do that on a calculator or kind of just think about it for a second. And so what that's going to do is that's going to make this equation 36 plus 9 plus 6. Right? Plus 9 plus 6. So now the last step, you are close to the last step, is you want to factor. Right? You want to factor everything, as well as kind of simplify the equation. So, and what I mean by factor is this. Well, you have this x squared minus 12x plus 36. That's a classic quadratic equation, right? You've seen that many times. So we can either use Xbox to solve that, so I can do that over here maybe. So let's see, we have a 36, and we have a negative 12. We ask ourselves what numbers would add up to negative 12 but multiply to 36, and of course that is negative 6 and negative 6. And so we have this new equation of x minus 6, x minus 6, let's go ahead and add the 9 and 6 to get 15. But we notice we have the same thing twice here, and when you multiply the same thing by itself twice, that of course is the same thing as, squaring it. So we have 1/4 x minus 6 squared plus 15. And that's why we did that crazy thing of adding the 36, because what that allowed us to do was it allowed us to split up this equation so that we got x minus 6 squared. And now this is starting to look a lot more like the standard form of the parabolic equation. So anyway, we want to get all the x's, so last step is get all x on on one side and y's on the other. So it kind of looks like we've done that here. The only thing is that what we need to do is remember in the classic formula, which I'll rewrite here, and it looks like because the x is squared, we're actually going to be using, that means that this parabola goes up and down because of the last lesson. So remember the equation for this is going to be x minus h squared equals to 4p y minus k. And this is remember this is a vertical, so this is a vertical parabola. That's a vertical parabola. And so now we want this to look like this. We want this, a number, if we're going to have any numbers, we want them in front of the y. And we also want it so that we get a y minus k. And we want this term, this x minus 6h squared, we want the square term by itself. So what we'll do is let's subtract 15 from, let's see, is that what we want to do first? Give me 1 second here. Yes, let's do that first. So let's subtract 15 from both sides. So we do that. So we get y minus 15 is equal to negative 1/4 x minus 6 squared. And again, our last step is we want to get the whatever squared by itself so that it looks like our vertical parabola standard equation. So we're going to multiply both sides by negative 4. And what that gives us, it's going to give us negative 4. Don't forget this parentheses here, because you're not just multiplying it by the y, you're multiplying by the y and the negative 15. So don't forget about that. Is equal to, so that 4 went away along with that, and that gives us x minus 6 squared. And you're done. And so that's the standard form of this equation. And so what that allows you to do now is, now that you have that information, is, well, now you know what k is. So k is going to be, we know k is going to be 15. We know h is going to be 6. And we also know that p, well, think about it, if p is, if the thing in front of the y minus k has to be 4p, then p has to be, then p by definition has to be, let's see, negative 1, right? Because you have negative 4, or 4p is equal to negative 4, and then you can just divide by 4, or sorry, 4, and you get p is equal to negative 1. So p is equal to negative 1. So from that information, you can just figure out. So we know the vertex. The vertex is just, so let me write that down here. The vertex is just going to be, running out of space here, hk. And so we know the vertex of this equation is going to be at 6, let's see, 615. We know the focus has to be h, but then, so the same thing is, but then we have the k plus p. So this is going to be 6, and then 15 minus 1, because 15 plus minus, that's going to subtract, so that's going to be 14. We know the directrix. We know the directrix has to be y is equal to k minus p. So in this case, that would be 15 minus 1. So 15 minus minus 1, that would give us 16. And last but not least, if we're looking for the axis of symmetry, that's going to be x is equal to the h. And in this case, h is going to be equal to 6. And that is everything that we need, that we were asked to solve. Oh yes, we got to graph the parabola, don't we? Well, that's pretty simple, because now all we have is, we have everything we need to know to graph it out. And I'm not expecting you to know how to graph it out completely, get everything right. A sketch is fine. So what I'm going to do is, because this graph is kind of small, is I'm going to make this, I'm going to count these lines by 2. So 2, 4, 6. And I'm actually going to count these by 3, because 6, 9, 12, 15. Okay, so that means our vertex is up here. Our focus, because it's 14, is going to be somewhere around there. Somewhere around there. Our directrix is going to be around 16, so our directrix is going to be, sorry. And then, of course, our axis of symmetry is going to run right down the middle there, and our parabola probably is going to look something like that. Okay, so there is that problem for you, fully completed and done. So what I'd like you to do next is go ahead and look at problems number 1 and 2. And once you are, maybe work through them for a minute or two, kind of see if you can get it yourself using the model we just used. And then we'll come back and we'll discuss how you do those. So good luck.